The Montana sun hung low and merciless over the Yellowstone River, casting harsh shadows through the cottonwoods that lined the muddy banks. October wind carried the bite of winter across the water, stirring dust devils on the far shore, where sagebrush stretched toward distant peaks already dusted with snow. The year was 1873, and this country still belonged more to those who could shoot straight than those who wrote laws in distant capitals. Maka knelt in the shallows, his paint horse drinking deep from the current, while water swirled around his moccasins. At 28, he carried himself with the fluid confidence of a man who had survived more winters than most whites expected any Indian to see. 3 eagle feathers hung from a beaded band in his black hair. Honors earned in raids against Crow warriors, back when such things mattered more than they did now. His rifle, a Henry repeater traded from a grateful cavalry deserter, rested across his knees, while his dark eyes scanned the opposite bank, with the wariness of a man who had learned that survival depended on constant vigilance. The woman appeared like a ghost through the brush, and Maka's first instinct was to melt back into the trees. Nothing good ever came from getting involved with white settlers, especially their women. He had seen too many of his people hanged on trumped-up charges after being accused of improprieties with white females. The smart thing, the safe thing would be to disappear before she even noticed his presence. But something in the way she moved stopped him cold. She stumbled from the willows, 20 paces upstream, bare feet, slipping on river stones, wearing nothing but a torn chemise that had once been white. Her auburn hair hung in tangles past her shoulders, and even from this distance, Maka could see the tremor in her hands as she collapsed to her knees at the water's edge. But it wasn't fear that made her shake. It was the kind of pain that came from wounds both seen and unseen. "Don't turn around," she whispered across the water voice, barely carrying over the current. "Please, don't look at me." The plea carried such raw anguish that Maka found himself rising slowly, water streaming from his leggings. His better judgment screamed at him to leave, to ride away from whatever trouble this woman represented. But something deeper, perhaps, the memory of his own sister's face, perhaps simple human decency, kept him rooted in place. He turned to face her fully. The afternoon sun struck her back like a blade of light, revealing what she had tried to hide. Raised welts crisscrossed her skin from shoulder blades to the small of her back, some fresh and still weeping, others white with age. The pattern was too regular, too purposeful to be accidental. Someone had taken a whip to this woman, and more than once. A shout echoed from the cottonwoods behind her, harsh and commanding. "Isadora, get your worthless hide back here." The woman Isadora flinched as if struck again. Her head snapped toward the trees, and Maka saw her face clearly for the first time. She was young, perhaps 23, with high cheekbones and green eyes that held too much knowledge of cruelty for someone so near to childhood's end. Blood trickled from a split lip, and finger-shaped bruises darkened her throat. More voices joined the first, accompanied by the sound of horses crashing through underbrush. Maka counted at least 3 men, maybe 4, their progress marked by snapping branches and muttered curses. What caught his attention, though, were the smaller boot prints in the mud near Isadora's position. A child's prints barely visible, but definitely there, leading both directions along the bank, as if someone had been pacing, watching, waiting. "There." The first voice again, closer now. "By the water." Rifle barrels glinted through the leaves. In that moment of decision, Maka's internal war reached its conclusion. Yes, helping this woman would bring danger. Yes, it violated every rule of survival he had learned in 28 hard years of life on the frontier. But sometimes a man had to choose between safety and his soul, and Maka had seen enough evil to recognize it when it stared him in the face. He splashed toward Isadora, his hand closing around her wrist with gentle firmness. "Can you swim?" he asked quietly. She nodded, eyes wide, but trusting in the way of someone with no other options. Then we go deep. Follow my lead, and whatever happens, don't let go. The first shot cracked across the water as they dove, the bullet hissing past Maka's ear to slap into the far bank. He pulled Isadora beneath the surface, his free hand finding his horse's neck as the animal instinctively moved toward deeper water. The current was stronger here, tugging at their clothes with cold fingers that seemed to reach straight through to their bones. More shots followed, the reports muffled by water and distance. Maka surfaced just long enough to gulp air and check Isadora's position before diving again. She stayed close, one hand gripping his belt while the other clutched his horse's mane. Smart woman, she understood that separation meant death. Behind them, angry voices grew distant as the current carried their scent away from any tracking dogs that might follow. But Maka knew this was only the beginning. Men who would whip a woman to bloody ribbons would not give up easily on reclaiming their property. They emerged from the water a mile downstream, shivering violently in the October air. Isadora collapsed on a bed of fallen leaves, her wet chemise clinging to her like a second skin and revealing more bruises along her ribs and arms. Maka averted his eyes while stripping off his buckskin shirt and the leather still warm from his body heat. "Here," he said, offering the garment without looking directly at her. "This will keep the wind off." She took it with trembling fingers, pulling it over her head, with a soft gasp as the fabric touched her wounded back. The shirt hung nearly to her knees, transforming her from victim to survivor in a single gesture. "Thank you," she whispered. I thought they would catch me this time." This time? Maka's voice carried careful neutrality, but internally he was calculating odds and distances. If this woman made a habit of running, her pursuers would be experienced at tracking her down. Her laugh held no humor. "You don't know Blackjack Caldwell, do you? He doesn't give up easy on what he thinks belongs to him." The name struck Maka like a physical blow. Even among the tribes, Blackjack Caldwell's reputation had spread, owner of the Silver Spur Mine, a man who bought law and sold misery in equal measure. Stories were told around winter fires of women who disappeared near his operations, of families who lost their water rights to his legal manipulations, of officials who grew rich on his bribes. "We need to move," Maka said, his tactical mind already working through their options. "They will cross downstream and circle back with dogs." "Where can we go?" Isadora struggled to her feet, and Maka found himself reaching out instinctively to steady her. The brief contact sent an unexpected jolt through him. Not attraction, not yet, but recognition of something that went deeper than mere physical awareness. Caldwell owns the sheriff. He owns half the territory. Maka gathered his horse's reins, considering their limited choices. His original plan had been simple: trade pelts for grain in Bison Trace, ask questions about his missing sister Zaltana, then return to winter camp before the snows came. Now that plan lay in ruins, shot to pieces by his own conscience and this woman's desperate need. "There are people who do not love Caldwell," he said finally. "We find them, and we make common cause." For 3 days they moved through the broken country west of the river, staying ahead of pursuit through Maka's knowledge of the land and Isadora's surprising resilience. She had clearly never lived rough before, but she learned quickly how to move silently through underbrush, how to read weather signs in the sky, how to find shelter in places that looked barren to untrained eyes. On their first night, sheltered beneath an overhanging ledge during a sudden snowstorm, Isadora finally told him her story. "My father claimed Coyote Springs before the territorial survey," she said, her voice barely audible above the wind. "It's the only reliable water source for 50 miles. When he died 2 years ago, I inherited the claim through his will." And Caldwell wanted the water, Maka surmised. More than wanted needed. His mine operations require massive amounts of water, and he was already having disputes with neighboring ranchers over usage rights. So he found a solution. Her hand unconsciously moved to her throat, touching the faded bruises there. A forced marriage to a circuit preacher with a gun pressed to my ribs and his men as witnesses. Legal enough to hold up in court, especially when the judge is on his payroll. Maka fed small sticks to their carefully concealed fire, keeping the flames low to avoid detection. You could have contested the marriage. Found honest authorities. With what proof? Isadora's laugh was bitter. My word against his woman's testimony against a respected businessman. The preacher was bought. The witnesses were bought. Even the marriage certificate was filed properly. On paper, I became Mrs. Blackjack Caldwell willingly. But you weren't willing. I wasn't anything. I was property being transferred from one owner to another. She pulled his shirt tighter around her shoulders. Caldwell didn't just want the water rights, though. He needed someone who could read and write, someone who could keep books and make his operation look legitimate to outside inspectors. So he made me his bookkeeper, forced me to document every transaction, every bribe, every acquisition. The word hung heavy in the cold air. Maka had heard rumors about Caldwell's special business interests, whispers that made his blood run cold. Women, he said quietly. He deals in women. Isadora nodded, tears freezing on her cheeks. Girls mostly. Purchased from desperate families or taken from isolated settlements. The mine needs workers, but it also needs other services. I was forced to keep records of every purchase, every sale, every payment to suppliers throughout the territory. As the fire crackled between them, Maka found himself staring into the flames and remembering. Zaltana at 14, standing up to 3 older boys who had been tormenting a stray dog, her small fists clenched and her dark eyes blazing with righteous fury. You pick on something that can't fight back, she had told them, and you'll answer to me. The boys had backed down not because they feared her size, she was smaller than any of them, but because they recognized something unbreakable in her spirit. That same spirit had made her volunteer for the dangerous task of gathering medicinal herbs near the white settlements, despite the risks to a young Indian woman traveling alone. Our people need medicine, she had said simply. I'm the best tracker and I speak their language. It should be me. The memory burned in his chest like a coal. Wherever Zaltana was now, whatever had been done to her, that fierce spirit would still be fighting. She would be counting on him to find her, to bring her home. The thought transformed his rescue mission from a family obligation into something deeper, a sacred promise that he would keep no matter the cost. Including your sister? He asked, though he already knew the answer. The question hit her like a physical blow. My brother Lucas. He's 15 and Caldwell has been using him. Her voice broke. At first, I thought Lucas was being coerced, forced to report my movements to keep me safe. But the amounts in the ledgers. Lucas is being paid more than most men earn in a year. This revelation explained the small boot prints Maka had noticed by the river, the way their pursuers always seemed to know their general location. But looking at Isadora's anguished face, he could see that her brother's betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. Their second day brought a blizzard that forced them to shelter in the abandoned trapper's cabin, where they found more evidence of Caldwell's reach. Among the debris left by previous occupants was a wanted poster bearing Maka's description, Lakota warrior, approximately 25 to 30 years old, riding a paint horse wanted for questioning in the abduction of Mrs. Blackjack Caldwell. $500 reward. $500. Isadora said, staring at the poster. That's enough to make every bounty hunter and desperate man in the territory come after you. After us? Maka corrected. We are in this together now. It was during that storm-bound night that their relationship shifted from protector and victim to something more complex. As they shared body heat beneath a moth-eaten blanket, listening to the wind howl through gaps in the cabin walls, Isadora began to reveal the woman beneath the victim. I wasn't always helpless, she said quietly. Before the marriage, I ran my father's ranch for 2 years after he took sick. I can shoot, I can ride, I can make hard decisions when necessary. Caldwell tried to break that part of me, but he never quite succeeded. What changed? What made you run when you did? Isadora was quiet for so long that Maka thought she had fallen asleep. When she finally spoke, her voice carried steel beneath the softness. I had been stealing copies of the ledger pages for months, hiding them in my clothing, waiting for the right moment. Then last week, Caldwell received a telegram that made him furious. A federal marshal was coming to investigate reports of missing Army payroll funds. Caldwell knew someone had been feeding information to federal authorities, and he suspected me. So you ran. I tried to destroy his records first, set fire to his office during the night shift change when most of the guards would be at the mine. But Lucas, her voice broke. Lucas was watching. He raised the alarm before the fire could spread. Caldwell's men caught me before I could escape, and he decided to make an example. The whipping had been public performed in front of the entire mining camp as both punishment and warning. But it had also been Caldwell's mistake because it had shown Isadora exactly how far he would go to maintain control. That's when I knew I couldn't save myself by being obedient, she continued. I could only save myself by fighting back. On their 3rd day, they finally reached the outskirts of Bison Trace, but not before encountering their first real test as partners. A pack of wolves driven down from the high country by the early snow had caught their scent and began following at a distance. Maka had noticed them first. 5 adults probably desperate enough to attack humans if the opportunity presented itself. We can't outrun them on foot, he told Isadora, checking his rifle's load. And my horse won't carry us both fast enough to escape. Then we don't run, she replied, surprising him with her steady voice. What do we need to do? The plan they devised was simple but dangerous. Using Isadora as bait, they would draw the pack into a narrow canyon where Maka could pick them off one by one from high ground. It required perfect timing and absolute trust if Isadora moved too soon or too late, or if Maka missed even one shot, she would be torn apart. But it worked. When the wolves charged, drawn by what appeared to be a vulnerable target, Maka's rifle spoke 5 times in rapid succession. The pack leader fell first, then the others in quick succession, their bodies tumbling into the canyon floor. Reload, Isadora called, watching the canyon mouth for movement. There might be more. Her calmness under pressure, her quick thinking in crisis, completed Maka's reassessment of this woman. She was not just a victim seeking rescue. She was a survivor who had been temporarily beaten down, but never broken. That night, camped within sight of Bison Trace's lights, they shared their first kiss. It was not born of passion, but of mutual recognition. 2 people who had found in each other someone worthy of trust and respect. When their lips met, both understood that whatever happened next, they would face it together. Tomorrow we start the real fight, Isadora said, settling against his shoulder with newfound intimacy. Tomorrow we start to win, Maka replied, his arm tightening around her. Meanwhile, in the town of Bison Trace, another conversation was taking place that would prove crucial to their cause. Theodore's surgery was lit by a single oil lamp, as three figures huddled around his desk, their voices low but urgent. "It's getting worse," Tom Bradley was saying, his weathered face grim in the lamplight. "Pete Sawyer lost another 12 head of cattle this week when Caldwell's men blocked access to the creek. That's 3 families now who can't pay their debts come spring." The door burst open suddenly, interrupting their conversation. Martha Patterson stumbled inside, her face streaked with tears and her hair disheveled from a frantic ride into town. The middle-aged rancher's wife clutched a torn piece of fabric in her trembling hands. "They took her," she gasped, collapsing into the nearest chair. "They took my Sarah. Found this by the old mill where she was supposed to meet the Collins girl for their sewing lesson." Tabitha Collins moved immediately to comfort the distraught woman, but her own face had gone pale with understanding. "How long ago, Martha?" 3 hours, maybe 4. I rode hard as I could, but..." Martha's voice dissolved into sobs. "She's only 16. My baby girl is only 16 years old." Dr. Theodore examined the torn fabric, fine cotton, from a dress he remembered treating Sarah for a broken wrist the previous spring. The violence of the tear, then the small bloodstains along the edge told their own story. "This is the 4th girl this month," Tabitha said quietly, consulting a ledger she kept hidden beneath loose floorboards in her schoolroom. "Emma Patterson came to me yesterday crying her eyes out. Her 16-year-old daughter never came home from the trading post." Tom Bradley's hands clenched into fists as he stared at the papers scattered across the desk, unpaid bills from families who could no longer afford medical care. Death certificates for children who had died from preventable diseases because their parents couldn't buy medicine. "How many more?" he asked quietly. "How many more families does Caldwell have to destroy before someone with real authority takes notice? Federal marshals don't care about a few missing ranchers' daughters," Bradley replied bitterly. "And the territorial government." He spat into the spittoon beside the desk. "Caldwell owns them all." "Then what do we do?" Tabitha asked, her schoolteacher's composure cracking to reveal the steel beneath. "Do we just watch while he destroys everything decent in this territory?" Martha Patterson looked up from her grief, her tear-stained face suddenly fierce with a mother's rage. "You find him," she whispered. "You find the devil who took my daughter, and you make him pay." The 3 sat in silence for a moment, each lost in their own dark thoughts. Outside, the wind rattled the surgery's windows, carrying with it the scent of snow and the promise of a hard winter ahead. "We pray," Dr. Theodore said finally. "We pray that someone with the courage to fight him shows up before it's too late." None of them knew that their prayers were about to be answered in the most unexpected way possible. The town of Bison Trace squatted on the prairie like a collection of weathered bones, its buildings huddled around a single muddy street that served as both thoroughfare and drainage ditch. But to Mahka and Isadora, approaching after 3 days in the wilderness, it looked like civilization itself. Dr. Theodore's surgery occupied a modest building with a painted shingle hanging above its door. The middle-aged physician took one look at Isadora's condition and stepped aside without a word, gesturing them into the warmth of his treatment room. "Sweet heavens, child," he murmured, helping Isadora to a chair near the pot-bellied stove. "What has that devil done to you now?" The question confirmed their hopes. Dr. Theodore was no friend to Blackjack Caldwell. As he cleaned and treated Isadora's wounds, the full scope of the corruption became clear. Caldwell had arrived 3 years ago with a railroad survey crew claiming mineral rights through a maze of legal documents that no local authority could properly challenge. The Silver Spur mine produced genuine silver, but its real value lay in controlling access to Coyote Springs, the only reliable water source for 50 miles in any direction. Every rancher, every farmer, every settlement depends on that water. Dr. Theodore explained, applying salve to the worst of the whip marks. Caldwell rations it out like a king dispensing favors, charging whatever the market will bear. Those who can't pay see their cattle die and their crops fail. Tabitha Collins, the town schoolteacher, joined their conference with a Winchester rifle and a grim expression. She had been fighting Caldwell's influence in her own way, documenting the disappearances of young women and girls from throughout the territory. 43 in the past 2 years. She reported consulting a carefully maintained ledger. Some from desperate families who needed money, others simply taken during raids on isolated homesteads. The territorial authorities claim they're investigating, but nothing ever comes of it. Because Caldwell owns the investigators, Isadora said bitterly. I've seen the payment records. Judges, sheriffs, even some army officers all receiving monthly stipends in exchange for their cooperation. It was then that Tom Bradley arrived with news that changed everything. The grizzled former cavalry scout had been watching the roads for signs of pursuit, and what he had observed made his weathered face grim with concern. Caldwell's mobilizing everything he has, Bradley reported. 20 men minimum, maybe more, all well armed and carrying descriptions of you both. But that's not the worst part. He paused, meeting Isadora's eyes with obvious reluctance. Your brother is leading them, not as a prisoner or hostage, as their chief tracker. The confirmation of Lucas's willing betrayal hit Isadora like a physical blow, but she had been preparing herself for this moment during their 3 days in the wilderness. When she spoke, her voice was steady, despite the pain in her green eyes. Then we know what we're facing. Lucas knows all my old hiding places, all the routes I might take, all the people who might help me. Caldwell couldn't have chosen a better guide. Why? Dr. Theodore asked gently. What could make a boy betray his own sister? Isadora was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames of the stove. When she finally answered, her voice carried the weight of painful understanding. Lucas was 11 when our father died. He tried to be the man of the family, tried to take care of me and run the ranch. But he was just a child. When Caldwell arrived with his promises and his money, Lucas saw a chance to finally be someone important, someone respected, someone feared. And when Caldwell married you, Lucas convinced himself it was a good thing, that Caldwell would take care of me, protect me, give me a better life than we could manage on our own. When the beating started, she shrugged helplessly. Caldwell told him it was necessary discipline, that I was being ungrateful and rebellious. Lucas wanted to believe it, because the alternative was admitting he had helped sell his sister to a monster. The psychology of betrayal was complex, but the tactical situation was simple. With Lucas guiding them, Caldwell's men would eventually track down any hiding place in the territory. Their only hope lay in taking the fight to the enemy before he could bring his superior numbers to bear. We need allies, Maka said, studying a rough map of the territory that Dr. Theodore had sketched on brown paper. People who have been hurt by Caldwell's operations, who have reason to want him stopped. The ranchers, Tom Bradley suggested. Virgil Morrison, Pete Sawyer, Jim Hutchins, they've all lost cattle to the water restrictions. Their families are facing financial ruin. And the families of missing women, Tabitha added. They may not have much in the way of weapons or fighting experience, but they have motivation. Over the next several hours, they developed a plan that was audacious in its scope and desperate in its necessary haste. While Maka and Isadora would infiltrate the Silver Spur mine to rescue Zoltana, and the other captive women, the ranchers and townspeople, would coordinate a series of diversionary attacks designed to draw off Caldwell's security forces. But first, they needed intelligence about the mine's current layout and security measures. Isadora's information was 6 months old, and Caldwell had certainly made changes since her escape. It was then that an unexpected ally appeared. Young Billy Morrison, Virgil's 16-year-old son, had been working at the Silver Spur as a general laborer for the past month, sending most of his wages home to help his family survive the water restrictions. "I can get you current information." Billy volunteered, his youthful face serious with determination. "Guard schedules, layout changes where they're keeping the women. But you have to understand, it's worse than you think." According to Billy's report, Caldwell had expanded his operations significantly since Isadora's escape. The original compound now included a secondary facility hidden in a canyon behind the main mine, where the most valuable merchandise was kept under heavy guard. More ominously, Caldwell had been receiving visitors from as far away as San Francisco and Denver buyers who came to inspect his inventory before making substantial purchases. "There's supposed to be a big auction next week," Billy whispered. "Maybe 20 women total, including some who just arrived from the East. If you're going to do something, it has to be soon." The time for careful planning had run out. Within hours, word spread through Bison Trace's network of disaffected citizens, and by nightfall, nearly 30 men and women had volunteered for the desperate mission. They were not professional soldiers, just ordinary people pushed beyond their limits by a system that had failed to protect them. As they prepared to leave town under cover of darkness, Isadora took Maka aside for a private conversation that would define everything that followed. "There's something else," she said quietly, her hand resting on the oilcloth packet that contained her father's water rights deed. "The ledger pages I stole don't just document Caldwell's local operations. They show connections to territorial officials, federal contracts, even international buyers. This isn't just about one corrupt mine owner, it's about an entire network of criminal enterprises. Which means, even if we succeed tonight, there will be others to take Caldwell's place," Maka observed. "Not if we expose the whole system, not if we make the evidence public and force the authorities to act." She met his eyes with fierce determination. "But that means some of us have to survive to tell the story." It was a sobering reminder that their mission had implications far beyond personal revenge or family loyalty. They were not just rescuing captives, they were striking a blow against a system of corruption that extended throughout the territory and beyond. As they rode toward the Silver Spur under a canopy of cold stars, both understood that they were crossing a line from which there could be no return. Whatever happened in the hours to come would either break Caldwell's power forever or result in their own deaths. But they also understood something else, that some fights were worth having regardless of the odds, and that sometimes the greatest victory lay not in surviving, but in refusing to surrender. Behind them, the lights of Bison Trace flickered like distant candles marking the last outpost of safety they would see, until the battle was won or lost. Ahead lay the Silver Spur compound, where Zaltana and dozens of other women waited in desperate hope for a rescue that might never come. Between safety and salvation lay a gauntlet of armed men, trained dogs, and deadly terrain that would test every skill they had learned in their brief but intense partnership. But as Maka felt Isadora's arms tighten around his waist and heard her whisper words of encouragement in his ear, he knew that whatever the cost, they would face it together. The real battle was about to begin. The Silver Spur compound sprawled across a hillside like a cancerous growth, its buildings connected by paths and wooden bridges that climbed toward the main mine shaft. Even in the pre-dawn darkness, the place buzzed with activity, ore carts rumbling along narrow tracks, steam hissing from processing equipment, and the constant percussion of hammers against rock echoing from the depths below. Maka and Isadora observed from concealment among the pine trees that crowned a neighboring ridge, studying the layout through a telescope borrowed from Tom Bradley's saddlebags. What they saw confirmed their worst fears about the scope of Caldwell's operation. "The original compound has doubled in size," Isadora whispered, her breath visible in the frigid air. "That new building with the chimney, that's where they process the ore. The barracks have been expanded to house at least 50 workers. And there," she pointed toward a cluster of smaller structures surrounded by a stout picket stockade and brush fencing. "That's where they keep the women." But it was the secondary compound that truly illustrated the magnitude of their challenge. Hidden in a canyon behind the main facility, it was fortified like a military installation, with watchtowers, dense arrays of oil lanterns, and calcium limelight lamps, and armed patrols that never seemed to rest. "How many guards total?" Maka asked, mentally calculating odds and angles of attack. "At least 20 during day shift, maybe 15 at night. But they're not just miners with rifles. Caldwell has been recruiting professional gunmen from throughout the territory. Men who know their business and aren't afraid to use their weapons." As they watched, a familiar figure emerged from the main administration building, moving with the confident stride of someone accustomed to absolute authority. Even at this distance, Black Jack Caldwell was unmistakable, tall, expensively dressed, carrying himself with the arrogance of a man who believed himself untouchable. "There he is." Isadora breathed, her hand unconsciously moving to the knife at her belt. "The man who destroyed my family and turned my brother against me." Maka studied Caldwell through the telescope, noting the way other men deferred to him, the casual authority with which he issued orders. This was not a man who had stumbled into evil through weakness or circumstance. This was someone who had chosen corruption as a path to power and pursued it with methodical ruthlessness. "He will not be easy to kill," Maka observed. "Such men surround themselves with protection." "I don't want to kill him," Isadora replied, surprising him with the steel in her voice. "I want to destroy him. I want to tear down everything he has built and scatter the pieces to the wind. Death would be too merciful." Their reconnaissance was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses, a patrol making its rounds of the outer perimeter. But these were not random guards. They were moving with purpose, following what appeared to be a specific trail. "They're tracking something," Maka realized, watching the riders through the telescope. "Or someone." The answer came in the form of a young voice calling from the darkness below. "Over here, fresh tracks leading toward the ridge." Lucas Rains emerged from the shadows, leading the patrol, his boyish face animated with excitement as he pointed toward their hiding place. Even at 15, he moved with the confidence of someone who had found his calling as a tracker and scout. "He's good," Maka admitted reluctantly. "Better than I expected." "He learned from our father," Isadora said, pain flickering across her features. "Papa taught both of us to read sign, to follow trails, to understand how the land speaks to those who know how to listen. I never thought Lucas would use those skills against his own family." The patrol was climbing toward their position, now following a route that would bring them within rifle range in less than 10 minutes. Maka and Isadora had to choose between fighting or fleeing, and either option carried deadly risks. "We go deeper into the mountains," Maka decided. "Lead them away from the compound, make them work for every mile." What followed was a deadly game of cat and mouse that lasted throughout the day. Lucas proved to be every bit as skilled as his sister had claimed, following their trail across terrain that should have defeated any tracker. But Maka had advantages that the boy lacked: decades of experience, intimate knowledge of how to use terrain as both weapon and shield, and the desperate motivation of a man protecting someone he had come to love. They led their pursuers through a maze of canyons and ridges, always staying just ahead of capture, always forcing the patrol to work harder for each mile gained. By afternoon, both horses and men were showing signs of exhaustion, and Maka began to hope they might escape entirely. But Lucas had one more trick to play. As they descended into a narrow canyon that Maka thought would provide perfect concealment, rifle fire erupted from multiple directions. The boy had not just been following their trail, he had been herding them toward a predetermined killing ground where Caldwell's men waited in prepared positions. "Ambush!" Maka shouted, throwing himself from his horse as bullets whined through the air around them. He landed hard on the rocky ground, his rifle skittering away across the stones. Isadora rolled behind a boulder, her revolver already in her hand, but their tactical situation was hopeless. At least 8 men had them in a crossfire, with more arriving as Lucas's signal brought reinforcements from the compound. "Surrender now, and Mr. Caldwell promises you'll be treated fair." Scarface Sam's voice echoed off the canyon walls. "Keep fighting, and we'll drag your bodies back, tied across our saddles." For a moment that stretched like eternity, Maka found himself looking directly into Isadora's green eyes across the gap between their respective pieces of cover. In that gaze, he saw not defeat, but determination, and the same fierce resolve that had carried her through 3 days in the wilderness and a lifetime of abuse. "Together," she mouthed silently. "Together," he mouthed back. What happened next would be talked about in saloons and around campfires for years to come. Instead of surrendering or making a futile last stand, Maka and Isadora executed a coordinated breakout that caught their attackers completely off guard. Maka's war cry split the afternoon air as he charged directly toward the strongest concentration of enemies, his knife gleaming in the sunlight. At the same moment, Isadora provided covering fire from her position, her revolver speaking with deadly accuracy as she targeted the shooters trying to bring down her partner. The unexpected aggression broke the ambush's carefully planned geometry. Men who had been confident in their superior numbers suddenly found themselves under attack by opponents who refused to behave like trapped prey. In the confusion that followed, Maka recovered his rifle and began returning fire with the methodical precision of a warrior who had learned his trade in battles against professional soldiers. But it was Isadora who provided the moment that turned potential disaster into opportunity. As Scarface Sam moved to flank Maka's position, she put a bullet through the deputy's gun hand, sending his rifle spinning away into the rocks. "That's for every woman you've helped destroy." She called out, her voice carrying clearly above the gunfire. The psychological impact of seeing their leader wounded was immediate. Caldwell's men began to waver their coordinated attack, dissolving into individual acts of self-preservation. When Tom Bradley and a dozen ranchers arrived at the canyon's mouth, drawn by the sound of battle, the remaining attackers fled rather than face a prolonged firefight. "Thought you might need some help," Bradley said laconically, surveying the battlefield where several of Caldwell's men lay wounded or dead. But Lucas was not among the casualties. The boy had disappeared during the fighting, melting away into the landscape with the same skill he had used to track them. Maka knew they had not seen the last of Isadora's brother. If anything, this defeat would only make him more dangerous and desperate. "He'll go straight back to Caldwell," Isadora said, reading his thoughts. "Tell him everything he observed about our tactics, our numbers, our capabilities. By tonight, the compound will be locked down tighter than a military fortress." "Then we don't wait for tonight," Maka replied, checking his ammunition supply. "We attack now while they're still reacting to this setback." Back at the Silver Spur compound, Lucas stumbled into Blackjack Caldwell's office with tears streaming down his face and his hands shaking with exhaustion and fear. The boy had ridden hard to reach the mine ahead of any pursuit, pushing his horse to near collapse in his desperation to report the ambush's failure. "They got away," he gasped, expecting punishment, perhaps even a beating for his failure. Scarface, Sam is hurt bad, and we lost at least 4 men. I'm sorry, Mr. Caldwell. I tried to lead them where you wanted, but instead of the explosion of rage Lucas expected, Caldwell remained eerily calm. The mine owner rose from behind his desk and moved to place a paternal hand on the boy's shoulder, his voice gentle and understanding. "Easy there, son," Caldwell said softly. "You did exactly what I asked you to do. You tracked them, you herded them into the trap, and you got yourself out alive when things went sideways. That's not failure, that's good soldiering." Lucas looked up with desperate hope in his young eyes. "But they escaped, and now they know I'm working with you. Isadora will never trust me again." "Trust?" Caldwell's laugh was cold, but not unkind. "Lucas, my boy, you're thinking about this all wrong. Your sister stopped trusting you the moment she realized you were being paid to watch her. But that doesn't matter anymore, because after tonight there won't be enough left of her to have opinions about anything." The boy's face went pale. "What do you mean?" "I mean, this little rescue attempt is exactly what I've been waiting for," Caldwell explained, moving to a wall map that showed the compound and surrounding territory. "Your sister and her Indian friend think they're coming to save prisoners. What they're actually doing is walking into the most perfect trap I've ever set." He gestured toward the map, his finger tracing potential approach routes, with the confidence of a man who had thought through every contingency. "See, Lucas, the beauty of having enemies is that they become predictable. They'll try to save those women because that's the kind of people they are. Noble, heroic, stupid. And when they come," Caldwell's smile was predatory and cold, "when they come, we'll be ready. And you, my boy, will have the honor of helping me finish what your father should have done years ago, teaching the Rains family that some people are born to serve and others are born to rule." He turned back to Lucas, his smile widening. "You've done good work, son. Real good work. And tonight, when this is all over, you'll have proven your loyalty beyond any doubt. You'll be a man, Lucas. A man who chose the winning side when it mattered most." Lucas nodded eagerly, desperate for approval, and too young to fully understand the implications of what he was agreeing to participate in. "What do you need me to do?" "Just one more thing," Caldwell said, his hand still resting on the boy's shoulder. "One final test of your commitment to our cause. When your sister comes, and she will come, I need you to be the one who puts the rope around her neck." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of hammers echoing from the mine shaft below, a mechanical rhythm that seemed to count down the hours until a family would be forever torn apart by greed, manipulation, and the terrible choices that desperate people make. The final assault on the Silver Spur compound began at sunset, with the western sky painted in shades of blood and gold that seemed appropriate for the carnage to come. Tom Bradley led the main force in a frontal attack designed to draw attention away from the real objective, while Maka and Isadora approached the women's prison from the canyon's blind side. But Caldwell had prepared one final trap. As they worked their way through the stout picket stockade and brush fencing that surrounded the secondary compound, explosive charges detonated throughout the canyon, triggering a massive rock slide that sealed off their escape route. They were committed now, victory or death, with no middle ground between. "He's willing to bury his own people to stop us," Isadora observed, watching tons of stone crash down across the canyon mouth. "Then we make sure his sacrifice means something," Maka replied grimly. They fought their way through 3 lines of defense, each more desperate than the last. Caldwell's guards knew they were facing not just rescue attempt, but complete exposure of their criminal enterprise. If any of the captive women reached the outside world alive, the resulting investigation would bring down everyone involved in the trafficking network. The battle for the women's prison was brutal and personal. Quiet Will Caldwell's sadistic supervisor made his last stand in the building's doorway, using a teenage girl as a human shield while he tried to negotiate safe passage. "You want them," he snarled, pressing his pistol against the girl's temple. "Come and take them." It was Isadora who ended the standoff, her bullet taking Will through the eye with surgical precision. As the supervisor's body hit the ground, 37 women and girls poured from their prison into the smoky canyon air. Zoltana was among them, her face bearing the marks of abuse, but her spirit clearly unbroken. She embraced her brother briefly before arming herself with a dead guard's rifle and joining the fight with the deadly efficiency of a born warrior. "The main compound," she said urgently. "Caldwell has retreated there with his remaining men and a dozen captives he's using as bargaining chips. If we're going to end this, we have to root him out." The final battle took place in the Silver Spurs Administration Building, where Caldwell made his last stand surrounded by ledgers and account books that documented years of systematic criminal activity. He was not the coward many had expected. When cornered, he fought with the desperate fury of a man who knew that capture meant the gallows. But it was Lucas who provided the most shocking moment of the entire conflict. As Caldwell prepared to execute a captive woman to force negotiations, the boy appeared behind his employer with a rifle in his trembling hands. "Let her go, Mr. Caldwell," Lucas said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I can't. I won't let you kill anyone else." Caldwell turned with contempt written across his features. "You pathetic little whelp. After everything I've given you, everything I've taught you, you're going to betray me for these worthless—" Lucas's rifle spoke once, the bullet taking Caldwell through the chest and spinning him away from his intended victim. As the mine owner fell, his face registered not pain, but amazement that a 15-year-old boy had found the courage to defy him. "I'm sorry, Isadora," Lucas whispered, his smoking rifle falling from nerveless fingers. "I'm so sorry for everything." Isadora knelt beside her dying brother, tears streaming down her face as she took his hand in hers. The bullet that had killed Caldwell had passed through the man's body to strike Lucas in the abdomen, a mortal wound that would claim him within minutes. "I forgive you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You're my little brother, and I forgive you." Lucas smiled, and then his face peaceful for the first time in months. Tell them I tried to make it right at the end." He died as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, taking with him the last shadows of childhood and innocence that had somehow survived in that blood-soaked canyon. In the aftermath of the battle, as smoke cleared and the wounded were tended, a different kind of healing began. Isadora sat with several of the rescued women near the dying embers of what had once been Caldwell's office, sharing water from a dented canteen and speaking in quiet voices about what came next. The women gathered around her represented a cross-section of frontier tragedy farm girls taken from isolated homesteads town. Daughters lured away by false promises, immigrant women who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Some were barely 16, others closer to 30, but all bore the same haunted look of survivors emerging from a nightmare. Zoltana appeared beside them, carrying a small loaf of bread she had found in the guards' quarters, its crust hard but its interior still soft enough to chew. Without ceremony, she broke it into pieces and distributed them among the group, a simple act of sharing that somehow carried more meaning than any grand gesture could have. "What will happen to us now?" asked a girl who couldn't have been more than 16, her eyes still wide with the shock of freedom. She spoke with a slight German accent, probably the daughter of immigrants who had come west seeking better lives for their children. "We'll find you families," Zoltana said gently, offering the girl a piece of bread. "Or we'll help you make new ones. The important thing is that you're alive and you're free, and no one will ever hurt you like that again." Another woman, older and more bitter, shook her head. "Free to do what? Go back to families who might not want us. Try to find husbands who'll overlook what was done to us. You don't understand. We're marked goods now." "No," Isadora said firmly, her voice carrying a strength that surprised even herself. "You're survivors. And survivors have value that goes beyond other people's judgments." She looked around the circle of faces, seeing not victims, but potential allies in a larger fight. "We're going to need an organization," she continued. "Something permanent. Something that will help other women who find themselves in similar situations." "Already thinking about it," Zaltana replied, meeting her future sister-in-law's eyes with a small smile. "We've got work to do." The exchange was brief, but meaningful, a moment of connection between women who understood that their shared trauma could become a source of shared strength. In the flickering light of the dying fires, bonds were being forged that would outlast the immediate crisis and create something lasting from the ashes of Caldwell's empire. 6 weeks later, the first formal court session convened in Virginia City, the territorial capital, with Judge Harrison Martin presiding over proceedings that would reshape the legal landscape of Montana Territory. The evidence recovered from Caldwell's safe was overwhelming, detailed records of systematic corruption involving dozens of territorial officials, fraudulent mining claims worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, and a human trafficking network that extended across multiple states and territories. Isadora testified with quiet dignity about her experiences, her words carefully chosen to avoid inflammatory language, while still conveying the full scope of Caldwell's crimes. The water rights deed she had preserved proved to be the key that unlocked Caldwell's entire legal facade, revealing how he had used forced marriage and forged documents to steal resources from legitimate claimants. The defendant's operations constituted a criminal conspiracy of unprecedented scope, Judge Martin declared in his final ruling. The evidence shows systematic violation of federal and territorial law, including human trafficking, bribery of public officials, fraud, and murder. All property and assets belonging to the Caldwell organization are hereby seized and designated for restitution to victims. But the legal victory was less important to Maka and Isadora than the personal closure it provided. During the weeks of testimony and investigation, they had worked together to establish a new organization dedicated to helping trafficking victims rebuild their lives. The Territorial Women's Aid Society operated out of a modest office in Virginia City, with Zaltana serving as its first director and Dr. Theodore providing medical support. Tabitha Collins managed educational programs designed to prevent vulnerable women from falling prey to similar schemes in the future. "We have received funding from the territorial government," Zaltana explained to visitors, "along with private donations from people who were horrified by what we uncovered at Silver Spur. The organization will operate throughout Montana Territory with branch offices in major settlements." The work was dangerous and often heartbreaking, but it represented hope for countless women who had previously faced such threats alone. More importantly, it gave meaning to the suffering endured by Caldwell's victims, transforming their trauma into a force for positive change. As winter deepened around Coyote Springs, Maka and Isadora returned to the land where their relationship had first taken root. The springs still flowed freely, their warmth preventing complete freezing even in the depths of the season. Around them, the cooperative established by the surviving ranchers was thriving, with new buildings under construction and plans for expanded operations in the spring. "We could build a house here," Isadora suggested as they stood near the springs on a crisp January morning, her breath visible in the cold air. "Something simple but permanent. A place to raise children and grow old together." Maka considered the proposal, imagining a life of seasonal routines and long-term planning. It was different from anything he had previously envisioned for himself, but then again, Nothing about his relationship with this remarkable woman had followed conventional patterns. "Would you be content with such a life?" he asked. "No adventure, no danger, just the daily routine of managing water rights and mediating disputes between neighbors." Isadora laughed the sound, carrying clearly in the cold air. "After what we have been through, ordinary life sounds like the greatest adventure of all." They were married in the spring in a ceremony that combined Lakota traditions with territorial law, witnessed by friends from both communities, and blessed by leaders who understood that love could transcend cultural boundaries. The wedding feast featured buffalo provided by Maka's tribal cousins alongside beef from the cooperative's herds, symbolizing the merger of two ways of life. Their first kiss as husband and wife carried none of the desperate urgency of their earlier embraces, but was filled instead with the quiet confidence of two people who had chosen each other with full knowledge of both the costs and benefits such a choice entailed. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came later that evening, when Zaltana approached them with a small bundle wrapped in soft leather. "This belonged to Lucas," she said quietly, offering the package to Isadora. "I found it among his things after the battle. I thought you should have it." Inside the wrapping was a small wooden carving, a horse and rider that Lucas had been working on during his final weeks. The craftsmanship was crude but heartfelt, and pinned to it was a note written in a boy's uncertain hand, for Isadora, so she remembers the good times too. Tears flowed freely as Isadora clutched the carving to her chest, finding in it evidence that some part of her brother had remained decent despite everything Caldwell had done to corrupt him. "He was trying to find his way back," she whispered to Maka. "At the end, he was trying to come home." "He did come home," Maka replied gently. "He died protecting innocence, just as you taught him. That is the legacy that matters." As their first child was born, a daughter with her mother's green eyes and her father's quiet strength, they named her Hope, in recognition of what their union represented. She would grow up in a world where the color of her skin marked her as different, but also in a world where her parents had proven that love could overcome any obstacle when built on mutual respect and shared values. Years later, when their children asked about the scars on their mother's back and the stories that were whispered about their parents' first meeting, Maka and Isadora would tell them the truth that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the worst circumstances, and that true strength is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. They would teach their children that family is not just about blood, it is about choice, loyalty, and the courage to stand by those choices no matter what the cost. And they would pass down the lesson that had emerged from their own painful journey, that redemption is always possible for those who have the courage to reach for it, even when reaching comes too late to change the past. Every spring, when the waters of Coyote Springs ran clear and cold from their mountain source, the family would gather to remember those who had died to make their happiness possible. The ranchers who had fought beside them, the women who had suffered in Caldwell's prisons, and yes, even Lucas, whose final act had been one of courage rather than betrayal. And in those moments of remembrance, surrounded by the children and grandchildren, their love had made possible Maka and Isadora would understand that their story had become something larger than themselves. A testament to the enduring power of hope over despair, of love, over hatred, of the human capacity to choose goodness, even in the darkest circumstances. The springs would continue to flow, the seasons would continue to turn, and the land would continue to heal from the wounds that greed and corruption had inflicted upon it. But the greatest healing would always be found in the simple truth that two people thrown together by chance and bound together by choice had refused to let evil have the final word in their story.